Alex, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're best known for your work in molecular hydrogen recovery and pushing the conversations around human health and performance. But you've spoken about your own health struggles before discovering molecular hydrogen. Can you take us through that journey and what made you start looking at your health on not just a surface level?
Yeah, absolutely. I know you've mentioned your age and your audience's age and everything like that. And I will say when I was in my 20s, I thought I was indestructible, right? I wasn't concerned about longevity. I wasn't concerned about chronic issues because I felt I was superhuman and would never collapse. And then perhaps instigated by a few really idiotic decisions, first I went hardcore, you know, into paleo, and I was eating a lot of raw vegetables, and I was trying to match like historic fiber intake and getting over like 100 grams of fiber a day, all from like raw vegetables out of the big pot I was eating. And I gave myself, oh man, I'm having a brain fart. Happens at the end of the day. It's by 5 p.m. and I've been working since 5 a.m. But
That's fine.
basically, I gave myself a gut issue. I wasn't processing my food. I was just passing through, right? Heavy inflammation. Um, and I had a really strong gut back then, and I thought it was fine. Rebounded, and like a week or a couple weeks later, I got food poisoning. And then went and did like a CrossFit competition a couple of days after food poisoning because I thought I was going to rebound.
It's a smart
And
decision, I think.
yeah, it was a brilliant decision. It wrecked me. Like my legs felt like they were going to fall off. I probably had borderline rhabdomyolysis. I was in rough shape, but I recovered, thought all was well, went back to my normal training. And then a few weeks after that, I got a mystery virus, and my best friend and roommate at the time, he got it too. He got pretty sick. He missed like 3 weeks of work with pneumonia, but it hit me different, and I had an autoimmune response to it. And in the first acute phase, I had central nervous system fatigue. I couldn't jump an inch off the ground, couldn't do anything explosive. I went from like a 54-inch plyometric box jump to I couldn't get my feet off the ground, from like 20 unbroken bar muscle ups to I couldn't do a chest to bar, just nothing. But like my deadlift and squat, things that were just slow strength, they were unaffected. It was so bizarre. But I also had sudden onset narcolepsy. If I sat still for a couple minutes, I'd fall asleep, and I was sleeping over 16 hours a day. And I
Wow.
only felt fine when I was exercising, but then after exercise, I just crashed hard. And I was like anemic during this time, and my C-reactive protein, so a marker of inflammation, was 34 milligrams a liter. That's maybe 100 times abnormal, and like
Mm.
today, even in my 40s, they're undetectable, for my HSCRP, highly sensitive CRP. So I was in all kinds of rough shape, and that lasted a couple months. And when the dust settled, the inflammation had attacked my joints, my cartilage, and I was left with polyarthritis. So I had osteoarthritis at 11 joints. The worst of which was my left shoulder. This is it now. I cannot raise it. It is bone on
Mm.
bone arthritis, and I have multiple labral tears. But I also have arthritis in my hands, my neck, my left um, hip, both knees, my right
And this was
foot.
all of a result from the autoimmune disease?
Yeah, just ravaged everywhere. I had, stress and previous injuries, just got lit up bad. My left shoulder the worst, but maybe now you could consider my back the worst. I have 4 ruptured discs and a compressed SI joint, so that's fun. But
Yeah.
just went and got stem cells for that, so hoping for the best. But
How's that going?
it's going all right. I went down to Tijuana for it, and injected them right into my discs, and the first 4 months were hell. Like, it was worse than it had ever been. Um,
Wow.
and now we're at like month 6, and I like cleared a mat of algae off the pond on my property, like
Mm.
a day's worth of backbreaking work, right? With
Yeah.
a long 20-foot net, pulling it in, like, and leaning in, picking up debris, and then like started dredging the bottom to get rid of all like the sludge. Like I bought this acreage and nobody had lived here for like a year. So everything was like, you know, not, and like my back held up, and my back held up during the move, and I've done some hard workouts. So I'm pretty optimistic actually,
Yeah,
but
that's cool. Stem cell treatment has come a long, long way. Obviously, you're having to go to special places to get it done, but it looks promising.
yeah, no, it is. I actually, funny enough, when I got into hydrogen, like the first thing I was looking into was stem cells. And I didn't have the money I have now back then, but in all the research I was reading, there was no consistency in their
Mm.
protocols. The clinics had no consistency whatsoever. The results were
Mm.
inconsistent, and there were so many questions and unknowns that I decided to forego it back then, which was probably a good thing because they're figuring out so much more recently. Uh, but yeah, like when the dust settled, and I had arthritis in all these joints, and my GP, my medical doctor at the time, was of a walking clinic, basically said I could never exercise again, and yeah, just go for walks. Right, that's your life now.
Wow.
I was like 29 years old, and put me on 1,000 milligrams of naproxen a day. So like 5 times the Aleve dose a day, and cortisone injections, and said, we'll treat your pain. And
Yeah.
I just didn't accept that. And so it's interesting because desperation makes you do some crazy things. Because back then, I was kind of like a skeptic troll, and I was banned off of most of the natural pages on Facebook, including many
Wow.
customers and friends of mine today. I didn't know them back then, but like banned on their
Mm.
pages for trolling the things they said. Um, and I really, really hated the supplement industry, and I hated the natural industry, and I hated all these things. I just thought they were idiotic. But when your health collapses, you get desperate, and you're willing to do or try anything. And, you know, I did. I threw my money at literally anything and everything, even if there was no
Mm.
evidence. Like, just, I want to get better. I want to exercise again. I want to feel better. And hydrogen water was one of those things. I bought a machine for like $5,000. It was one of like 20 things I was doing back then, maybe more, and went on my merry way. But after like 9 months or something like that, I fainted in the gym a few times, in a couple-week period. I developed multiple ulcers, and I wasn't processing my food. So the naproxen had wrecked my gut again, and I had like
Mm.
my stomach lining was wrecked. It was just a bad scenario. So I had to stop. And then, like, shortly after stopping, my joints froze back up. Like, I couldn't put on socks without lying down, couldn't put on a jacket. Like, it was bad. And so I realized that the only things working were the drugs. And I went back to PubMed. So like when I started looking into anything and everything, like I was just spending 8 hours a day on PubMed, reading study after study, paper after paper. I went back to PubMed. I found more papers on hydrogen and hydrogen water. And it pissed me off because I had this like $5,000 machine that was doing nothing. But it just dawned on me, well, what dose am I getting? Right? How are they preparing the hydrogen water in these studies? So I started buying the materials and methods. For listeners, like, usually or often in scientific research, the research is behind a paywall. So you might get like an abstract or the conclusion, but you can't actually see the methods and the meat of the study and what they did. You have to pay for
Exactly.
that.
I remember
You
I
know,
remember being in uni and having to do my own research, and then you'd find those studies that you then can't get access to unless you paid for them.
yeah, $40 to $80. And it's
Mm.
insane. Like I have a book coming out on which is a big chunk of it is on this, but the academic publishing makes more than the film industry. They're charging
Wow.
at like every end. Like they charge the professors and the researchers to publish and then charge people to read, right? They're charging
Wow.
on both ends. It's absolutely insane. It's criminal, right?
Mm.
It's like if you had slaves and made the slaves pay for the right to do the work on your
Yeah.
land. That is how academic publishing works.
Yeah.
It's insanity. Um, so I was paying for these papers and quickly realized that not a single one of them was using a machine like what I'd bought. And they were all reporting
Mm.
concentrations, of the hydrogen. And so I found a reagent to test for the hydrogen, and it was undetectable, right? I couldn't
Wow.
detect any. And so then, like, I was desperate, and that gave me hope. I'm like, I haven't tried this hydrogen thing. And I'm an extremely obsessive person. Like, I will not let go of something until I find resolution. And so I went and I was trying to make hydrogen water, and I was scouring, finding elemental magnesium. It's highly controlled. Like in the US, there's only a few places in the world that make this fine powdered elemental magnesium, like the US, Russia, China, right? Places like that. And they all are
Yeah.
highly controlled, in export and distribution. And so I found sources in like China and Eastern Europe, and they were arriving saying like silver pink color, right?
Yeah.
Like, to skirt like
Not
regulations. I'm
sketchy.
like, well,
Not sketchy.
yeah, not sketchy at all, right? Like, but I started like trying to mix out formulations and do a bit of chemistry, and quickly realized that like the powders were floating, so I needed to get it to sink. So I found like a hand press to make little tablets. It was actually like I you know think for hash or something like that, right? Like
Mm.
it wasn't actually or maybe it was to make like MDMA pills. I don't know. It was on a website selling like a lot of like cannabis and paraphernalia. This little hand
Yeah.
press. So I bought it anyways because again, even buying the equipment to do like R&D in tablets, like make tablets in Canada, because of the illegal drug trade is like super regulated, right? Like I tried to
Mm.
buy one off Alibaba in China and it got seized at the border, right? And so like I'm like, listen, guys, I'm just trying to make this like thing you've never heard of called hydrogen water.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying
you
to make
know,
a hydrogen bomb here, just let me have it.
yeah, yeah. So I started making these tablets and playing around with it. And back then I was getting like 3 parts per million. I was drinking like 4 liters of it a day. And all of a sudden my joints started loosening up and I started feeling great. And it was just kind of like, you know, maybe there's something to this. And then I had a super second thought and I'm like, you know what? This is coming in pretty sketchy, like silver paint powder, right? And so I started testing it for like contaminants and heavy metals. And because I was buying like, it probably was like fireworks grade, back then. I was like,
Mm.
they were like acceptable by government levels, but higher than I wanted, if that makes sense. Right. Like,
Yeah, yeah, I
in the
understand, yeah.
tablets I make now, like, it's actually like a medical grade of magnesium, the same grade they use in like implants. Like they'll use magnesium based like screws. So you don't need a second surgery
Mm.
to remove the screw because
Yeah.
they dissolve in your blood. So the purity is like a lot greater, right? With levels of contaminants that are like sometimes like 100, 1,000 times lower than like the EPA allows in the US for drinking water. So it's like way lower than pharmaceutical limits, California Prop 65, any jurisdiction in the world we pass by like, exponents, right? So anyways, like tested that. I'm like, okay. And then I'm like, well, what else? And I'm like, I understood the chemistry well enough to do this, right? Um, but I'm not a chemist. What if like some side reactions happening and I'm creating a poison, in the water and I'm going to kill myself? So I found my founding partner, who's a PhD chemist from the pharmaceutical industry. He told me what I was doing was the worst pseudoscience he'd ever heard in his life. Right? Gave me all these reasons why H2 wouldn't have any physiological effect. And even if it did, why you'd inhale it, not drink it. And I responded to all his criticisms with peer-reviewed papers, and including pharmacokinetic papers where it showed, distribution of H2 in various tissues in the body, depending on if you inhaled or drank. And, in certain tissues, such as like in the gut and the liver, hydrogen water is getting to at a much higher concentration, um, at a much higher like level, even when the dosage you're getting is like a fraction, like hundreds of times lower. So he basically said, I never would have guessed there was any evidence on this. All right, I still don't buy it, but I'll take a look at what you're doing. And so he was reviewing the chemistry. There was like nothing crazy. He made like a couple small tweaks. But every day I was excited. I was just sending him a new paper on hydrogen. And serendipitously, I sent him one on a certain disease state. It was a like phase 2 double-blind RCT. And he called me. So basically, when I met up with him at lunch, he had printed off the paper. And he said, all of those other studies you sent me, I just had to look at the materials and methods, make sure that they were designed properly, and trust the conclusions, of the researchers, because I wasn't a subject matter expert. But on this paper, this is what I'm working on. And unless this is fraud, this works, right? And I wish our molecules were working this well. And he said, are you sure you want to just be doing this as a do-it-yourself project, or are you looking to commercialize? And I had to do some soul searching because I really did not want to get into the supplement industry and natural industry, but it was the only thing that really made sense uh, to do
Mm.
it. And I got some other, buy-ins, an attorney when I was thinking about raising money, and then asking about things like shareholder primacy and fiduciary duty, and realizing I don't want to raise money, and what do I have to do if I just want to get it from close friends, and figuring out how to bypass you know perspe- you know prospectus, and he basically shook my hand, did all the work for me for free on a handshake that I'd continue doing business with him. Once I got into it, that was another cool buy-in. I hand pressed a lot of tablets for friends and family dealing with issues, and was just getting like phenomenal testimonials. And I wasn't big on testimonials. They're the lowest form of evidence, but I was also experiencing for myself. And I was trying to do objective measurements, like taking photos in the mirror of like my before and after mobility, and write
Yeah.
notes on what was going on. And it just, I don't know. It's hard to explain, because it had such an abrupt, immediate effect on me, and so many others were reporting it. And then, with the emerging evidence, I just decided to go for it. And I quickly
Mm.
realized that, making 20 tablets in a mortar and pestle, hand pressing them, or making millions at high speed on industrial equipment, night and day different. So it was like 16 months of R&D, 3,000 iterative adjustments to formula, um, 15 failed scale-up attempts, right, where it didn't work in manufacturing until we got our first production-ready tablet. And it still wasn't as good as the ones
Mm.
I was pressing by hand, like not even close. Uh, but then at
Why?
that
Why would
point,
that be?
oh, just everything you need to do to get it to run at high speed, in the
Okay.
machine. And, like there's just a lot of challenges with making a delicate effervescent tablet like this. I went on to
Sure.
realize that most manufacturers aren't willing to try effervescence because they're so hard to work with. And then
Mm.
doing placebo tablets and doing my tablets, and the placebos are normal effervescence, and working with some manufacturers that do other effervescence, like the hydrogen tablets are like an order of magnitude more difficult than CO2 effervescence to get this to do properly. And that's before even considering like all the safety concerns, because magnesium
Mm.
is the white in fireworks. It burns at like 3,800 Celsius, right? And highly explosive. So we have to consider all that too. That's why it was controlled, and, you know, ended up having to get like an end use from the US government and go through a background check and all this cool stuff. But um, went on my merry way. And when I finally committed and saying, okay, I'm going to make a go of this, I'm going to make a business, I just asked myself, like, well, what if my product doesn't have the same effects as what's being studied in the research, right? What if the research isn't replicable, right? What if it doesn't pan out? And at the end of the day, I don't want to sell something that doesn't work or causes harm. And, I also want to, contribute to the pursuit of truth. And I say the pursuit of truth because we can never actually arrive at truth. The second we think we've arrived at truth, what we've actually relied, or what we've arrived at is certainty and belief and dogma, right? So the pursuit of truth. Um, And so I emailed every first and corresponding author on every clinical trial on hydrogen at that time, and many of the rodent ones. And I offered product and placebo, and to donate funds if they needed it, if I could afford it, with no strings attached. So publish the results regardless of outcome, right? If it works, if it doesn't work, if it causes harm, we need to know the truth, right? And I didn't know it at the time, but that was a big deal to a lot of researchers because that allows them to get grants. Because most private companies want to control the data and want to block, results if they don't work, right?
Hmm.
And a lot of funding bodies and grants prohibit giving funds if the data isn't owned by the public institution. So they were able to double dip, take funds from me and get grants while not having their hands tied. So we quickly created this research network with the tablets. Like to date now, we have 25 published double-blind randomized controlled trials, uh, 5 case reports, I think, published, I think 10 plus preclinical trials, and we actually have more research underway than we have published, right?
Wow.
So, we're you know gaining a lot of research, and a lot of the findings we're having are replicated. Like, say for instance, on like metabolic health, we've shown improvements in body composition and fasting glucose and such, like across like 9 different clinical trials, right? So,
Mm.
we're emerging. It's still emerging evidence, but we're moving into like larger multi-center trials on some
Yeah.
of
And
these
you said
targets
most of
like
these
metabolic
are
health.
RCTs?
Yeah. Yeah. So most of them are
Yeah.
smaller study groups, anywhere from like
Yeah.
24 to 60 people, right? So kind of
Yeah.
like, small phase 2 style, because they are RCTs with endpoints. Uh,
Hmm.
but I mean, that's what you need to do, especially with public research. So like in the one
Absolutely. And for
instance,
people who don't know, I mean, randomized controlled trials are currently the gold standard of research. I mean, that's your peak kind of thing at the moment.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and better yet, when you have enough of them and can do a systematic review and meta-analysis.
Mm.
So,
Yep.
I think we're getting close to being able to do a small systematic review and meta-analysis on the metabolic effects of just the hydrogen tablets, especially with, a couple of new papers that just came out. Um, but we have another one that is just initiating across 6 centers, and recruiting up to, a couple hundred people that we'll be following people for a longer period of time. Um, Recruiting based on low endogenous breath hydrogen. Like we naturally produce hydrogen in our body.
Hmm.
We evolved to do so. We just don't produce it to the extent that we evolved to expect. Um, so we make hydrogen by fermenting fiber. Now,
Hmm.
during our hunter-gatherer days before the agricultural revolution, we consumed 100 to 150 grams of dietary fiber a day.
Wow.
Now, for any like carnivore adjacent people, they might get angry and say, no, we ate meat. Well, of course we did. We ate a lot of meat, much more meat
When
than
we
we
could
do
get it.
now when we could get it, right? But we also ate plant foods. And the difference is, with the plant foods then and now, is they're unrecognizable to each other, right? Um, if you've ever seen a photo of what like wild grains look like wild corn or like wild like fruits and vegetables, uh, nothing like today. So 10,000 years of horticulture, we selected for the largest, juiciest, sweetest fruits, grains, vegetables over and over again. And we systematically stripped them of their fiber. So our
Mm.
plant foods historically were almost pure fiber. right? So we were eating tons of fiber to get a little bit of nutrients, and calories out of these. And especially if we couldn't kill something, we would have been stuffing our face with as much plant food as we could forage to just like save off starvation. Um, so we were getting this tremendous amount, 100 to 150 grams of dietary fiber a day is what the scientific consensus is, through looking back at the evidence that we have from various sources. Now, today the average person is getting 10 to 15 grams of dietary fiber a day, so like
Mm,
10%. But someone on a standard American diet is getting 0 to 3 grams of dietary fiber a day. So
wow.
they're getting like none. Now, because it's the fuel source of these bacteria that are fermenting fiber in our colon, right, to release the H2, uh, they're living things. If you don't give them their fuel, they die off in numbers.
Mm,
And what ends up happening is as these hydrogen producing, species die off, methanogens move in. And these methanogens are bacteria that actually consume hydrogen and release methane. So this is important because methane is linked to all-cause mortality, rising methane in the breath. It's linked to basically every chronic disease model. And we know that as we age, we tend to increase breath methane and decrease breath hydrogen, right? But in a study of centenarians in Okinawa, so people over 100 years old, these centenarians had higher breath hydrogen than the average young person, including their direct descendant, showing their lifestyle had kept a healthy microbiome to produce H2
mm,
into old age. And there's other, like preclinical evidence in rodents and, nematode worms and fruit flies showing that hydrogen can potentially extend health span and lifespan. Um, but in humans, we have a double blind RCT with hydrogen tablets, 6 month long, um, randomized controlled trial, placebo controlled, uh, average age 76. Now, these people had increased their telomere length, improved DNA methylation, improved their brain metabolism, but in functional outcomes, it improved their quality of life by reducing pain scores, and it improved something called the sit-stand test. So how many times
mhm,
these elderly people could sit and then stand before getting tired, right? Now, they got less fit in the placebo group and more fit in the hydrogen group. Now, that's already impressive when the average age is 76. Who gets more fit at 76? But then you look at the circumstances surrounding the trial. It was recruited in the spring of 2020, right? Full on
yep.
lockdowns during the
Yep.
pandemic. These people couldn't leave their home. They weren't going to the gym. They weren't getting exercise. They were stressed out, scared at home, average age 76. Yet they somehow got more fit over 6 months.
Mm.
So to me,
That's
that's one of the most important studies we have.
yeah, that's extremely interesting. Like you said, a 76-year-old improving health without actually having probably any muscular stimulus to do so apart from just what they're ingesting.
Yeah.
Okay. That is extremely interesting. You mentioned earlier about before you kind of went down this rabbit hole of hydrogen and that sort of research, you went to the doctor and they probably, in a way, overprescribed medication or wrongly prescribed
Hmm.
medication from, obviously not trying other alternative routes. Do you think society has normalized that sort of poor health because it's become so common? I mean, you go to a GP or a doctor and they just give you, I mean, a medication to try and just blanket over these ailments?
100%. I mean, I'm sure it's the same in Australia and Canada. Doctors will tell you their purpose is to reduce pain. Every
Mm,
question they have is, how much is your pain? What can we do to
mm,
help your pain? Right? Everything is about, you know, improving quality of life, they call it. But quality of life, they define by reduction of pain, which isn't how I
mm.
define quality of life. Um,
Well, I would say quality of life is perhaps functional capacity without pain.
yeah, and exactly, capacity and your ability to pursue what's important to you.
Mm.
in this life, right? Because pain is transient, and the more we experience it, the less impactful it becomes, right? But if we give up on everything that's important to us to reduce this momentary pain, then we've stripped everything it means to be alive. Um, uh, that's a different topic. I don't, I don't blame doctors for doing this because they're doing what they're taught, right? And they believe they're following the best evidence. And it's one of the big problems. The more I've thought about this over the years, the more I realize when I was that skeptic troll, I was acting tribalistically, like everyone tends to do. Uh, and when there's two sides, this false binary that are both tribalistic, we can't come to any sort of resolution agreement. We can't see what the other side sees, right? And when you embrace what your opponent has to say and see things through their lens, you realize that, hey, maybe you don't agree with most of what they say, but they are seeing something. And then you can get towards the truth. You can find those shards of shared observation and start untangling the mess. And that's one of the roads I've been going down for a number of years now, especially gaining this experience, publishing my own research, working with universities all around the world, both writing my own papers, funding research, going through regulatory bodies, to get approvals. All of this has given me keen insights I didn't have before. And, but then also working with a lot of these people on the natural side and listen to what they have to say and listen to their experiences and what they see has given me keen insights. And, trying to understand what's going on. And that's what we need to do. We need to get away from this like us versus them tribalistic nature. We need to have conversations. At the end of the day, we all want to live better lives, healthier lives, happier lives, lives of purpose and virtue for the most part, anyways. Uh, we just see reality through very different lenses. And when it's a binary, it's extremely unlikely one side is always correct in every way. Um, so what I'll say is the alternative side is absolutely incorrect in saying that, you know, medicine and academia is a big conspiracy theory. Doctors are evil and scientists are evil. It's just insane. If you've ever met one, that you dispel that immediately. But on the flip side, those on the establishment side need to recognize there are deep problems, in our systems and our paradigms, and we will not get better by ignoring them. And ignoring them because you don't want to give any credibility to the people claiming it's a conspiracy just creates more people thinking it's a conspiracy, right? And
Mm.
that's why it's a losing war. And so let's think about this. Let's think about why a doctor would give me 1,000 milligrams of naproxen, just want to treat my pain. Where does this all come from? Where does the empiricism on this originate? And we have to go back to the 1950s. And a big change occurred in the 1950s, in the late 1950s, for instance, with the privatization of academic publishing. Now, prior to that, um, and it actually started in the 40s, but it really ramped up in the 50s and became dominant. Uh, Prior to that, academic journals were nonprofit societies of learned individuals, professors, scientists, researchers, intellectuals, paid for by members dues, sometimes donations from universities and institutions. And you'd submit your paper, and it was open debate. And that is, there was no gatekeepers, right? Your idea survived or it didn't, in the public forum of intellectuals, right? Everyone trying to compete. Truth only emerges from friction like this. But then creating this private model, you know, led to, editors accountable to private interests. It led to selecting peer reviewers who are often, like we're blind to who those reviewers are so they can say what they want. But there was a couple key debates that were never formally settled, but were settled by editorial choices. One of those debates was the use of statistical significance and when it was appropriate. Now, there was big debates. Now, nobody was debating that you should never use statistical significance or exceedingly few anyways. But there was a debate and saying, in some instances, we need to judge the overall, effects on the organism, like us or the mouse or whatever we're doing, and not look at the p-values of individual markers, right? Because that doesn't tell the whole story in systems biology, right? Well, that debate got settled and everything had to be based on p-values and statistical significance just by sheer volume of publishing, that the private, owners of the massive journals decided. The second issue that got resolved, that was up for debate, uh, was somewhat closely aligned, and that was based on how to treat disease. And the emerging, pharmacological understanding of treating disease, which was based on, which is dominant now, but it was based on single molecules to single receptors or pathways, acting as agonists or antagonists. Well, this was not settled, you know, back then, but it went on to win some Nobel Prizes for these early discoveries, and it does make sense in some context. But this got prioritized for rather than again anything that treats the whole organism, systems biology, right? Something like exercise, diet. Well, maybe not so coincidentally, opting for statistical significance in all cases and this pharmacological understanding, of treating disease is very friendly towards pharmaceutical companies, right? It
Mm.
makes it much more advantageous to make patentable drugs, right? Patentable molecules that do specific things. You know, you can get massive changes from a statin on cholesterol, right? In a short period of time. But something like exercise, you will get slight changes across dozens of markers over a longer period of time. Now, you show a physician a before and after of two people, and they're going to go, oh, this person's way healthier now after this year of exercise. You're looking at the entire, you know, blood work and reports. But in statistical significance, you may not register a lot of this, right? Especially because a lot of these lifestyle interventions, uh, they work the best in how we respond to stress or stimuli, right? Like if you want to improve your metabolic health, you need to see what happens on a test result, both fasting and postprandial. You know, how did these various markers respond fasted and then after you eat, right? What was the change in modulation and regulatory ability? We don't do that in statistical analysis. So you look at these decisions that were made, and then this is where I'll go call conspiracy theorists, but this is just fact. The major publisher that opted to go this route with his journals, his company was called Pergamon Press, was Robert Maxwell, was the owner. So Robert Maxwell was a Mossad agent. He was Ghislaine Maxwell's father, right? Tied to Jeffrey Epstein, right?
Yeah.
He went on to sell Pergamon to his biggest competitor, which was Elsevier, which now makes up like 16% of all academic publishing, right? And he did that to get the money to buy, Macmillan textbooks, which merged with McGraw-Hill to become like the largest like school-age textbook for kids in the Western world.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
if we want to talk about what it means to think about empiricism and empirical evidence, we have to look at the foundation it was built,
Mm.
and this isn't to discount all the evidence we've accumulated, but the selection bias we have on publishing results that's all consensus driven, which is antithetical to the scientific method. And the fact that this early consensus was guided by a known fraudster with intelligence ties, right?
Mm.
We have to question if we were pushed in the wrong direction all those decades
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we
I
were, but we just have to ask that question.
Yeah, well, it's an important question to ask. I think from even a modern perspective, I mean, you mentioned like a statin for blood pressure, any type of blood pressure medication. I think also it might be easier in today's generation or today's day and age to give someone medication than to give them exercise prescription. I think a lot of people going into a doctor's office doesn't want to do the hard thing of exercise. And like
No.
you just said, we want to decrease it straight away. We want to decrease pain. That's their job. So I wonder if it
Yep.
almost not a laziness point of view from the doctor, but almost a, if you tell someone to exercise, they might get quite defensive and they go, I don't want to exercise. I don't want to do that. I mean, in your book, you
Yeah.
explained that there's this strange narrative now where discipline and self improvement or taking care of your body can almost be viewed as vanity or extremism. I mean,
Yeah.
would that be similar?
Yeah, 100%. And I go a little bit further in what will be my third book called Manufacturing Minds, The Education System's War on Free Thought, which will come out in late October. Um, and there's actually a inverse paradox that's occurring. When it comes to physical health, right? We like are kind of demonizing strength and telling people to be happy with who they are. You're 400 pounds, love yourself in your skin, right? Everything is about accepting any body shape or size, no matter what. But then you look at anyone who is neurodivergent, in our academic system, and we are pathologizing it. Oh, you have ADHD, right? You need to go on
Mm.
medication, right? You have autism. Your life is going to be hard. I mean, autism one is a catch-all. It's everywhere. It is a label. Like I have autism. It's a label for anyone from high functioning, high IQ people who are stuck in their own head to people who actually are nonverbal, right? And can't function. It's preposterous to call it autism. Same thing
It's
like
a large
AD.
spectrum.
Yeah. Well, but it's not. It's largely not real because it's so many different things. Same thing with
Mm.
ADHD. We define ADHD by the symptoms, not the cause, right? And so we prescribe medication for the symptoms, but the symptoms are largely people are fucking bored, especially young boys, and they don't want to comply. And so they don't want to comply and they're bored, of an education system in school that is structured to, you know, be relatively easy for someone with an 85 IQ. That's how we've designed our education system, right? No curiosity, no intellectual challenge. If you are a standard deviation below normal, you can put in minimal work and get through it. Just do as you're told. Don't ask questions. That's our education system. So we have pathologized strength of body, and embraced, like this weakness of body, while simultaneously, you know, pathologizing anything that is different in the mind as something that needs to be medicated. Or you have a little bit of social anxiety, let's give you a note you never have to talk to another human being, right?
Mm.
Um, so there's this opposite effect that we're doing here. And the result is we're weak in both mind and body. And so people have no capacity to do anything. And the people who do have capacity or do try and seize capacity are either labeled as weirdos or dangerous or extremists or anything that is supposed to make them feel guilty and ashamed for not wanting to have a disability.
Yeah. That's extremely interesting. Yeah. Some kid that doesn't want to engage with the syllabus because it's not relevant to them. And then they walk away from that, get told that they need to be medicated so that they can sit there and listen to someone speak
And do as
that
they're
they're not
told.
interested in.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, that's a
And
great take on it.
and then you look at the statistics, right? I think it's like 3 to 5% of people have ADHD, but over 35% of entrepreneurs have ADHD or were, you know, told they had ADHD and prescribed as children, right? So
Yeah.
the people who are told there's something wrong with you, why can't you just comply, are actually the people that go on to grow up and go and do something with their lives,
Mm.
and create something, right? But our education system was never designed to make people aspire for more. It was designed to make compliant workers.
Yeah. Well, you look back in history and obviously, these types of prescriptions are only probably more of um, a modern day thing. You look back through history and you look at Alexander the Great, maybe Napoleon, maybe Julius Caesar, these all high achieving men. I mean, I wonder if any of them, if they were in today's day and age, they're obviously highly ambitious, very obsessive. I wonder if they would have been prescribed something.
Hmm. Yeah, maybe. I mean, we know that historically, it's very easy to psychologize most of them with their journals and their notes. But historically,
Mm.
the vast majority of the greatest scientists and mathematicians and philosophers, have all been on, the autism spectrum, right? Um, we just know this, and like, yeah, probably they would have been pathologized, these great leaders. And I read about in my second book, it's coming out end of June, called "The Strong and Power of Human Nature and the Failures of Justice." And in the conclusion or epilogue, I think the conclusion, I write about how, and actually this is one of the coolest and also most emotionally exhausting experiences of my life. So I did a 22-hour book reading in Greece, with
Wow.
mostly with this book. I started at 5 a.m. before the sun rose with the Acropolis at my backdrop through like the glow of sunrise and sunrise. And then we went up to, Thermopylae, the hot gates where the Spartan soldiers, fought Leonidas and died. And I read at their burial site memorial, I mean, off and on rain, mosquitoes, into dusk in the dark. But those soldiers, and it was more than the 300 Spartans. There were other Greeks that stayed, but a little over a thousand of them, 1,500 or something like that. They knew that they were going to die, right? And they were doing it to buy time. So death was certain, but their loved ones and their future descendants being subjugated was not certain. And so they were willing to give up everything for that chance for their loved ones. But today, they would probably be called extremists, called dangerous.
Mm.
But dangerous to who? Right? Dangerous to the people who want to take everything, right? Not dangerous to normal people.
I hadn't really thought of it like that. It's Yeah. Let's move back to a little bit of science.
Mhm.
Do you think hormesis is misunderstood by a lot of people? I mean, having not enough dosage can be harmful while too much is toxic.
Yeah, I think most people don't get it. And one of the things, and I give a lot of my friends in the industry shit behind closed doors, and I do it in my book and I do it publicly. Um, you can't create a recommended ultimate like stack or greatest stack or best stack of all these hormetic agents that you tell all people all the time to use, right? You know, you wouldn't tell a 90-year-old grandma to put 4 plates on each side and hammer out back squats, right? Like we all have different physiological responses to different stressors, right? I talk about in my book, like I can sit in a cold plunge longer than a sauna, right? Unless it's a not as hot like infrared sauna, then I'm fine. But I keep my office typically at like 14 Celsius. I like the cold. I need it cold. I start getting heat stroke around 25, right? It
Mm.
like 25 Celsius. It starts getting like, if anyone's American, if it gets into the 80s, I'm absolutely screwed, right? And if it goes up to like 100 or if it goes up, 35, 40 Celsius, I am screwed. I cannot be outside. I'm outside for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and I am getting dizzy, right? I can't take it. So I look at these stats and I was like, what do you mean? You want me to be in like 180-degree sauna for 40 minutes? Like I will die, right? But at the same time, you know, I can sit easily in a cold plunge. If it's like 6 Celsius or something, I can sit there without thinking about it for 15 minutes. And in fact, I got myself into trouble one time because I took a phone call in a 6 Celsius cold plunge and realized I'd been in there for 35 and my body temperature was too low and it took me hours to warm it up. But if I told someone else to do that, they might have died, right? Just like I might be screwed in someone else's sauna routine. Not only that, um, we're not the same person right now that we were a week ago, and in a week from now, we'll be someone different. We are constantly shifting sphere, right? Based on our current level of stress. So the right amount of stress for any person at any time is shifting. And now you want to add stacks to that. You want to add multiple stressors back to back. How could you possibly say that this exact breakdown of intensity and time and duration of multiple stressors in a row is the best for all people always? It really demonstrates a lack of any understanding of how hormesis works.
It's not a cookie cutter kind of selection process. It's individualized to the individual. Each person is different. Like you said, you do better
Yeah.
with cold, so that the heat isn't going to be as hot, but you may still get the same benefits from doing so.
Yeah, 100%. And here's the thing: the best we do have are the double-blind RCTs, right?
Mhm,
But we are individuals; we're not averages, right? And with something like
mhm,
hormesis, the margin for error on a lot of these is great. It's sometimes a lot narrower than drugs, right? So
mm,
saying the same stress for all people always is dangerous. Um, Now, unfortunately, we don't have anything better, right? And I think we will in the coming years in a very short period of time. I was saying 5 to 10, but with the advances in AI, it could be 2 to 3 years away. With using like wearable technology like an Aura Ring or something in the future, we could be looking at our stress load in real time and using AI tools to recommend our dose and exposure of various stressors as it's tracking our physiological responses in real time, right? And then
that's
we could
so cool, yeah.
really be dialing it in. And like everyone has a perfect protocol every day for themselves.
Mm. Heat exposure is pretty fascinating because it can be incredibly therapeutic, and same with cold therapy. I mean, everyone knows who Wim Hof is, right? The Wim Hof
Yeah.
method. But there's also the potential risks. Where do you think people should be optimistic, and where should they be cautious in pursuing the benefits of both?
Nice. Um, with all of these things, none of them are magic, is what I want to say. And this is a big problem with so many influencers is they want to get, and also a lot of researchers get really sold on what they're researching and think this is a cure all. If everyone was doing this, everyone would be healthy, right? And in reality, I think all of these are good tools that we need to learn and judge our own responses from. And how do we do that? How do we do that without apps? How do we do that in the short term? And I think that gets back to something that we've lost in the last century of our institutionalized schooling. We aren't teaching people how to think. We aren't teaching them about critical thinking, analytical thinking, scientific method. This is actually something that I thought of and I'm funding. I'm not going to be the organizer of it. I pass it on to a nonprofit that I'm friends with. But at the Eudaimonia Summit in West Palm Beach, Florida, this coming November, uh, all myself, along with Gary and Cole Brecka of H2 Tab, are funding the first inaugural wellness science Olympiad, right? And the Molecular Hydrogen Institute is organizing it. They're actually starting a new entity that'll be underneath the MHI called the Wellness Science Institute. And we're not going to be, it's not going to be endorsing products or talking about like specific therapies as like focus. It's going to be focused on understanding the scientific method, critical thinking, right? Basic facts about our physiology, right? And then get into basic like mechanisms of how these various hormetic and lifestyle interventions potentially work, um, to try and give people back informed consent. Because how can any of us aspire to live better lives, to be healthier, right? How can any of us have informed consent when we're inundated with all this marketing from a million people if we don't
Mm.
understand the basics? And if we don't understand the basics of this, that anyone can tell us anything. And we either don't believe them and maybe we're writing off something that's genuinely true, or we do believe them and maybe they're scam artists, right? So it starts, we get better here by becoming better, right? By supporting each other through like collaborative friction to raise each other up, to ask questions, to pursue truth, to hold each other accountable in a respectful manner. Um, so that's kind of why I, decided to try and initiate and fund that. And I think through doing this, and there's going to be like challenges and ranking events, and in the ranking events, like top performers will be doing all expenses paid trips to compete at the summit, and there'll be like big prizes at the summit, about like 65 grand worth of like hydrogen inhalation machines and cold plunges and such. But um, you know, we're doing this mostly to kind of put our money where our mouth is. A lot of people in the space say, no, I believe the science in what I'm doing. Well, if you do, then you want a more educated public, right?
Mm.
Because if you have a more educated public and they can review the evidence you have, if you have good evidence and a good argument, then you have a more receptive audience, right? But
Mm.
if you're a scam artist and you have no evidence, you absolutely do not want a better educated public, right? So I want a better educated public. And if the public, once educated, says you're fucking crazy, then oh well, I'm trying, and maybe I am crazy, right? But at the end of
Yeah.
the day, we only get better together.
That's right. You mentioned critical thinking there, and I think I just had a crazy epiphany about being in university, and we had whole units on critical thinking, right? Trying to dissect science and different types of products, and like you're saying, some scam artists put things out there, and I would feel like I'm reasonably well at using critical thinking. You mentioned the soldiers that were willing to die for other people. I mean, that's critical thinking within itself, sacrificing what you have for someone else, beneficial for other people. But I mean, I have people message me, some friends, and they'll send me a picture of a product, and they'll go, "Do you think this actually works? Like, should I buy this? Should I take this?" And then I
Yeah.
look at the video of the product, and there's some AI guy lifting a truck,
Yeah.
right? And you go, maybe not. And you're so right. Like some people do lack that critical thinking, and they just believe what is put on the internet. I had
100%.
a lady, a client, a patient, and she was asking me about heat and cold therapy, and she was asking me about the protocols, what's the standardization, what's the standard. And I said, look, like, it's individualized. I said, everyone's different. It's best to start off slow with small time frames in both and just see how you respond to them. And she said, well, look, is there anywhere that I can do research? Like, I love doing my research. And I went, yeah, sure. I said, there's things called Google Scholar where you can look through on multiple articles. And she went, oh, Google Scholar. Okay, okay. I said, where have you been doing your research? She went, oh, just TikTok. And it's things like that that you go, okay, perhaps there does need to be more of a overall kind of goal to educate general public on where to actually find the correct resources.
Yeah, and how to evaluate once you find it,
Mm,
right? And
absolutely.
it gets into it like those who went into science or philosophy uh, are fortunate that perhaps you learn some critical thinking skills and do some courses on it. But still, all of us went through our institutionalized education, which is antithetical to critical thinking because
Mm,
we were taught not to question anything, that big
mm,
brother, the authority, have all the answers. Right? Do as you're told, right? This is the answer. Don't question it, right? Um, so by the time people get to grad school and start learning these skills, you're trying to learn them while trying to fight against an entire life of indoctrination
mm.
into doing the opposite. And so then you get anyone who didn't go to the sciences and they just have that full indoctrination, into unquestioningly doing as you're told and trusting. And the problem with this is you get this into this binary situation again, because you get half the population who just unquestioningly believes our institutions, right? And the government and our bureaucracies. But then you get the other half who their trust is broken, and now they're scared, they don't know what to do, and they look around the room. Well, who is the authority now? And they find some other con artist or psychopath on the internet who says, me, I'm the authority, right? And we look at how this training has occurred through our society. And I read about this a lot in my third book, and I think a bit in my second. Uh, we actually know, in neuroscientific research, that there is only a couple of like types of like neurological like brain types who are resistant to this compliance training that we get in our institutionalized education. High functioning autists, right, who are just obsessed with their own thing, you know, um, and people with antisocial personality disorder. So we created this system to have compliant workers. There's not a conspiracy. They didn't know what they were doing. They just wanted people to do as they're told and read and follow directions to work in factories. So we created this system, and now it's been a century and 5 generations where every person is told, don't question, don't be curious, do as you're told, right? Work hard, do as you're told. You know, the authorities have all the answers for you. Don't worry about anything. And so now, after 5 generations, who's the adult? Who is the authority? Right?
Mm,
Everyone's looking around. Who's in charge? Where do I get my directions from? My instructions from? Right? Well, the high functioning people with autism have no interest in climbing hierarchies. They're obsessed with whatever they're obsessed with. Uh, and the people who are neurotypical have no ability to really climb the ladders for the most part because they're looking for answers from someone above all those. But the people with antisocial personality disorder, especially because they've been slighted so many times when they're younger by not complying, embarrassed, angry about it, resentful, they really want to climb that ladder. And so we created this
mm,
system. We could not have devised a better system. We did it on accident. So we created this system that selects for psychopathy, right? And rises to the top. And
mm,
that's what we get at the top of our institutions. We get psychopaths, and on the internet with grifters, we get psychopaths, right? We also get, and this is what I'll say, uh, especially on the internet. A lot of these guys I thought were psychopaths when I got to know them. They're just autistic and just obsessed with one thing and happen to grow a big following, right? And like usually have no idea about potential harm they're doing, right? And that's one of the wonders of the internet, right?
mm,
In doing this. But no, we're being dominated in this way. And that's why when someone goes, oh, I'm awake, I've woken up, right? The government doesn't have my best interest in mind. But this dude on
mm,
YouTube does, right? Because they
mm,
still can't break away from that need to find an authority to tell them what to do.
How interesting. The people that set up that system are probably so long and gone, and some people have just managed to take their place through almost virality.
Well, yeah, I mean, our system, like people think, oh, conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy. This is an emergent system that has built piecework because it works, one layer at a
Mm,
time over a century, designed to make workers be able to read and follow instructions and do as they're told and be cogs, right? And then all of a
mm,
sudden, psychopaths started rising up. We started, getting legal precedents like shareholder primacy. All these things started happening, and with each win by the psychopaths rising to the top, they lobbied for more protections for themselves. Until after a century, we've gotten to this place where our laws and regulations often not only protect the psychopaths at the top, but demand that good people act like psychopaths and make it normative behavior, right? Like you
mm,
think about how, say, contract law works and how fiduciary duty works. We are forcing people to behave like psychopaths. That's just business, right? But it isn't just business. This has been decisions one at a time, legal precedent set one at a time, regulations lobbied for one at a time that has driven us, railroaded us into this destination where either you behave like a psychopath, which has been made normative, or you ostracize yourself from society.
yeah, yeah. It's you discuss, I mean, people falling into that trap of looking for something to follow, right? Even if it's
Yeah.
placebo, there's not much research about it. You've spoken about some pretty extreme wellness beliefs before. Can you tell me the story about the woman who believed she could survive off a cup of tea and sunlight?
Oh yeah, yeah. That was I read that. My one editor, Vadim, sent me that one. I mean, obviously she couldn't, right? Like,
Yeah,
um, but it's interesting the delusions you get from some people. Uh, and
yeah.
I believe a lot of them truly believe it until they're faced with reality. And I am seeing this over and over again now. And I won't name names, but with some very, very uh, big influencers, some of them, medical doctors who have millions of followers that I have regular communications with like ChatGPT, which is like these LLMs, AIs are the worst sycophant machines that have ever existed. And if someone
Mm,
has something in them, they drag it out. They make it 1,000 times worse. It's like cocaine on cocaine, right? Like, so you get these guys that maybe they have a little bit of a crazy idea. And maybe when they talk to others, they temper it and go, you're right, that's a good idea. But now they've spent 3 months festering this insanity, talking with their chat GPT, who's told them it's the most brilliant thing in the world and they're going to save humanity. And now they are fucking cocksure about it. Like, absolutely, you cannot tell them otherwise. They have figured it out. They're curing aging, or people are going to be immortal, or this or that. They've figured it all out. And like, how do you deal with that? And I think people like that woman with the tea and sunlight, this is going to get worse without AI. Because anyone who has crazy ideas like that, maybe they had a couple sycophants, yes men around them telling them, yeah, you are magical, right? Now people have this powerful device that they've been told is like a truth dispelling device, which is not. That's not how LLMs work, right? They work, and I've got a patent on circumventing this and redirecting it like intellectual judo. But they work on a few tenets. One is called reinforced learning from human feedback. Their mission is to give you the answer you want to hear. And then they use historical context, right? Everything they know about you, from your emotional state to your likes, your dislikes, your beliefs, to try and estimate what it's going to be. And then finally, they use the framing that you used, the context framing. And so it is a predictive machine trying to give you the answer you want at any given moment, right? And that's why if two people who have different political beliefs or, beliefs on like food or exercise ask the same question, you can get opposite responses, right? Based on how
mm,
well your AI knows about you. So we're going to get these people like the woman with the sunlight that are going to become so certain about their insanity that there will be no getting through to them. And they may ruin their lives because of it or die because of
Yeah. I watched a very small documentary on YouTube about a gentleman who discovered this and found that ChatGPT was just reinforcing what you wanted to hear.
it. Yeah.
And he told ChatGPT that he had this amazing invention that could conduct messages from space. And he obviously didn't believe it himself, but he wanted to see how far AI would try and convince him of it. So he went along with it and he said, I've got this idea. And he said, yeah, it's a great idea. I mean, this is something that you're really knowledgeable about. And he said, yes, ever since I was a baby, I felt like I've been more in tune with this than other people. And in the end, he followed AI's directions. He ditched his family. He went to an Airbnb to make sure no one was following him for this idea that he had written on a piece of paper. And then by the end of it, he was licking rocks because AI said that it would help him conduct his ideas better.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one, I saw a news report too. A guy was convinced that he was Neo from the Matrix by his AI. You know, like, it's insane, right? It's insane. But the one north the tea in the sunlight shows that we had that in us to begin with. And now we have AI, which will bring out and exacerbate that from a lot more.
Mm,
And,
mm,
we're losing our collective mind from it.
yeah. I mean, we're talking about these fitness fads or health fads. How do you personally separate open mindedness from gullibility when exploring these new health ideas?
It takes a lot of work, obviously. The truth takes work. Everything good in this life takes work. And we can't discount something just because it's new, right? That is the opposite of being gullible, right? Being closed-minded skeptic. And a lot of skeptics think, oh no, I'm going to reject everything until, it's set science. Well, that's not how thinking works. I'm sorry. Uh, but yeah, we can't let our brains float away because we're so open-minded. Um, Something like exercise, again, it's so personalized. Um, I first want to try and understand what a new exercise is purporting to do mechanistically, how it's different than something else. That's not really different. It's just something kind of new. Then sure, give it a try. Maybe it's a fad. Maybe you enjoy it, right? Who cares? Uh, and that is one thing that we do need to actually identify because often uh, something new that gets proposed, whether it's a new diet or a new exercise or something, has some merit to it, but the claims made surrounding it are preposterous. So we end up disregarding it in its entirety because of the misrepresentations made surrounding it. So
Mm,
that is one thing I try and do and say, what is real about this? You know, even if all these claims of like it being the best ever are preposterous, does it have a place? Right? Is there value? Is there evidence or is there even conjecture based evidence from what we know about the evidence? Is there plausibility? Right. So I try and break that all down. And if there's plausibility and there's no potential for harm or no greater harm than something else that I'm doing, then I try and do an N of one experiment with myself and see how I respond to it.
can you explain autophagy in simple terms and how someone can get the benefit out of that?
Yeah. I mean, so autophagy is just kind of like breaking down non functional cells to recycle and reuse in the body. And autophagy is all the craze in, say, longevity space. And people think, oh, you want autophagy all the time, but you absolutely don't, right? Everything in our body is contextual. It's both good and bad, right? Same thing like people think, oh, oxidative stress is bad. Actually, I mean, a lot of our oxidative and nitrosative stressors are important signaling molecules. Nitric oxide, for instance, is a free radical, right? So we can't think of these things as binary black or white. Autophagy The reason we think of it as good is because more often than not, people don't go into states of autophagy enough as compared to how we would have evolved to expect. So things like caloric restriction can put us into autophagy. Exercise can put us into autophagy. Actually, molecular hydrogen can activate autophagy, but it can actually suppress autophagy too in certain situations, like after drowning resuscitation and heart failure, which is important
Mm.
because you absolutely would not want autophagy in those situations. So it's a necessary process of our body, which usually we don't experience often enough with modern lifestyle, that tends to be activated by some of these hormetic stressors.
So to trigger autophagy, something like a 3-day fast, a 72-hour fast could do something like that?
Yeah, for sure. And if you want to really up it, like maybe go on to like a slight caloric deficit leading up to that 72-hour fast and then do hard workouts throughout, because a 72-hour fast where you ate in excess leading up to the 72 hours and then just laid in bed is not the same as one where you were at like a 300 calorie deficit for a week leading in, and then you killed yourself with the workout on day one and are active.
Yeah, right.
Your caloric deficit is going to be night and day different in those situations.
Yeah. No, so don't carb load to be preparing for sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
For someone hearing about molecular hydrogen for the first time, what makes it different from other wellness trends that come and go?
hmm. Well, I think with hydrogen, just like what I said about, like, say, other fitness trends, we have to separate what's real from what's hype, right? And there's so many companies making so many false claims about H2 and what it's doing and what it's capable of, and uh, basically equating it to magic. Now, with hydrogen, what I'll say is it's natural in the body. We produce it. We evolve to produce it. We know that we don't produce nearly as much of it as we used to. We know how it works mechanistically, right? It's working as a mitohormetic effector, so hormesis of the mitochondria is doing this. For anyone who's into the biochemistry and wants to know precisely, it's doing this by targeting something called the ricey iron sulfur protein in mitochondrial complex 3. It degrades it, which leads to a site release and superoxide, which triggers nerve 2 keep 1 pathway and production of our endogenous antioxidants like glutathione, superoxide dismutase, and catalase, and then a chain event, and we start regulating redox homeostasis, regulating inflammatory response through nuclear factor kappa beta. It just it goes on. So we know mechanistically how hydrogen works. It makes a lot of sense. The evidence is trending stronger and stronger. There's numerous systematic um, reviews and meta-analyses at this point. There's a few hundred double-blind RCTs on hydrogen therapy in general. Um, so usually when something's a fad, there might be one or two shaky studies, that can't be replicated. With H2, not only are these RCTs being replicated, but they're tending to find stronger effects when we're going to larger study groups with bigger doses and longer durations, indicating it's a real physiological effect, right? So we still need to understand when to use it, in what dose, for what periods, for what populations. We have so much more to understand. But at this point, it's undeniable to say that it has a physiological effect. It's just, what does that mean, right? Having a physiological effect doesn't mean it's universally good, right? Exercise has a physiological effect. It's usually good, and sometimes you can put yourself to chronic stress from too much exercise. Um, Alcohol, ethanol, has a physiological effect. It's usually bad, but there are circumstances with the perfect dose and the perfect timing where you could potentially improve your health, through that. What I'll say, you've got a younger audience. Nobody's going to want to hear this. Absolutely do not drink alcohol, anytime in the evening, close to bedtime. Uh, if you ever want to drink, like, do it the second, like, an hour after you wake up. Get like morning drunk, right? And then
Yeah.
sober up, go for a workout, eat a bunch of healthy food, and you'll actually sleep like a baby. It'll activate your lymphatic system in your brain.
Well, I mean, today's episode, I mean, we got our first mention of Jeffrey Epstein that I've had on the podcast so far. So that's a key word there. And then now we are obviously saying that alcohol in the morning is better than an hour or before bed, directly before bedtime. So we're
I'd
hitting all
say,
of the targets that I wanted.
yeah, I'd say it's it's potentially beneficial to your health to get drunk shortly after waking, but you don't even want to get drunk. You'd maybe want to have a drink or two shortly after waking. But it's definitely more harmful to have a single drink close to sleep than to get drunk right after waking. So long as you sober up, you get drunk and sober up,
Is
and
that
it
just
gets out of your
because
system.
during our sleep, then we're not getting to a deeper REM cycle or we're not getting into as deep of a
It, it,
sleep?
it disrupts our REM and deep. So it's actually interesting. Instead of having the a steady ratio of REM and deep throughout each cycle, we end up like front loading and having no REM in the first half of the night, and
Mm,
only like a comatose deep sleep. And then in the second half, if we sleep longer, we're basically just in REM and getting no deep. And
right.
so that's why sometimes if like you track an aura ring, you can get like a lot of sleep and you're like, like I got tons of REM, tons of deep, but you still feel like shit because your cycles were off. But more often than not, you wake up
Mm,
earlier and you don't get enough REM. Um, so with ethanol, um, there's something in our brain called the lymphatic system, and it's kind of like our junk. We'll think about like the trash man going around clearing out all the junk in our brain. Uh, when you give mice a tiny amount of ethanol, especially far away from sleep, it activates the lymphatic system and improves brain outcomes, right? If you give them too much or too close to sleep, it deactivates the lymphatic system, right? Which would
wow.
be linked to, all sorts of like central nervous system diseases and brain diseases, like all sorts of issues. What I could say anecdotally, if I have one glass of wine with dinner, it fucks up my sleep, right? But when I was in Russia about a year and a half ago, I was getting hammered at like 9 in the morning every day, but then walking 30, 40,000 steps, going to the banya, like, hot, cold, uh, not drinking in the evening. And my HRV was through the roof. My heart rate was the lowest it had been in like a year and a half. I drank every day for like 7 days and didn't have a single hangover. Right?
Wow. So are we hearing the next H2 tabs kind of product of a morning H2 tab with a dash of ethanol infused?
You know what? I can't say this because in the US, we can't market this. In the US, they consider hangovers to be a disease, believe it or not, which is insane. But if you don't believe hydrogen, but you are a drinker, take some hydrogen tablets before a night of drinking and then again in the morning and see how you
Hmm.
feel, right?
Mm,
Compared to usual. Or better yet, first, don't take them before you drink. Wake up in the morning feeling like shit and then take them, right? Note the difference and then next time take them before and then again on waking and note the difference.
mhm. Okay. So, like you said at the beginning of the podcast, I mean, when you were in your 20s, you felt invincible, you were healthy, you were lifting, you were active. I mean, I'm in a pretty similar boat where, I'm quote unquote very healthy. I exercise, I'm eating clean. For a 20-year-old that already feels quite healthy, what would be the benefits of taking a hydrogen tablet? What would be the response that I would feel from taking it?
So I would say, and the brands I supply to probably won't like this, you know, uh, but if you are very healthy and young, you don't need hydrogen that often, right? Like, don't take it every day, right? There's no point,
Mm,
right? Don't spend more money than you need to. Um, Hydrogen largely works by helping us regulate our response to external stressors. Now, we all have external stressors, but when you're young and healthy, you do a very good job at dealing with it. Slowly over time, you start losing that battle. And that's when hydrogen steps in. So If you're in your 20s and you're very fit and healthy and have a healthy lifestyle, I would only do hydrogen if you go and have a late night, or if you worked out way too hard and you feel run down like a bag of shit, or, say you have to travel and have jet lag, or say if you're, in university and you have to pull an all-nighter, because you didn't
Mm.
properly do your assignment or, study for your test and that's a cram. Where you have additional stress, where you're going to feel rough, take hydrogen then. But on your day to day, you probably don't need it.
Okay. Do you guys have Barocca in the United States?
They don't, but I know what it is because a lot of
Yeah.
Aussies have shown me. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. I'm imagining a similar sort of response to a Barocca, where if you have a rough night or, you feel like you're starting to get a little bit sick, an immediate response, take a Barocca because it's full of just sort of multivitamins and it can just
Mm.
almost help you across that edge. I imagine hydrogen obviously is a different process and the molecular breakdown is different, but that's
Yeah.
kind of the thing I'm comparing it to in terms of timing and taking it.
Yeah. I'd say, the big thing, I don't know what Broncos do, but like, with hydrogen, you're going to feel it in your head, right?
Mm,
We've got a couple clinical trials head to head against caffeine after 24-hour sleep deprivation, actually in college kids, right? Pulling all nighters, playing video games, and doing these studies. And we showed uh, equivalence in improving the attention network test, but hydrogen affects orienting, caffeine affects alerting. But we put everyone under fMRIs in a second study, a quadruple crossover. So everyone in the study did all four groups: placebo, placebo, hydrogen placebo, caffeine placebo, and hydrogen caffeine. And the hydrogen with or without caffeine had a significantly more robust improvement in choline to creatine ratios in the brain, so brain metabolism in more regions of the brain. So it wasn't acting like a stimulant like caffeine, it was just restoring proper function in your brain so you feel normal.
mm. So, how would it compare to something like, I know that there's some research around if you have sleep deprivation and you take, I think it's between 10 to 15 grams of creatine that can essentially help you get
Yeah,
back to a healthy level. Is hydrogen
yeah.
pretty similar to that?
Yeah, I mean, different mechanistically, but yeah, creatine can be
Mm,
helpful with that. And when I'm super tired, I double up on my creatine, and double up
mhm.
on my hydrogen too. Um, yeah, so that's again, yeah, helping restore function. One of the things with creatine in the brain is um, you need to take a lot of creatine supplements or from food because it doesn't pass the blood-brain barrier, right? So you basically you need to very little does. You need to take a lot of it to get to your brain. That's why the dose has to go so high.
Okay. I guess my next question was, hydrogen is such a small molecule. How do you keep it dissolved in water long enough for it to be effective rather than just evaporating back into the air before ingestion? And then also the
Yeah.
follow up to that was, how do you keep it obviously ingested and not just burp up that excess
Hmm.
air from the bubbling?
So I mean, it won't stay in your system very long. The hydrogen's only going to be in your system
Mhm.
for about 30 minutes, right?
Wow.
And part of that will be through burping up a bit. But how we keep it in the water is by making very, very small nanobubbles. We're making a burst of nanobubbles in the 10 to 30 nanometer range. And anything below 5 microns doesn't dissipate. Just like during the pandemic, they should have known that COVID wasn't going to only travel 6 feet because of the size of the particles. Whether it's a particle in the air, whether it's a gas bubble, whether it's a particle in water, a gas bubble in water, when you go below 5 microns in size, the physics changes. And the H2, so long as it's below the 5 microns, it forms kind of like eddy currents. It never dissipates. Particles won't float or sink; they just roll through. Right? That is really cool to watch under a microscope. So it's stable enough when we make this to chug it down, and you get the very high concentration that's your gut. The thing about hydrogen water is the benefits of hydrogen water are mostly through, peaks in cellular concentration that happen through your digestive tract, your gut, into your liver, right? So it's not really circulating through your whole body to a lot of tissues. Um, So long as you chug it down fast, you're getting it into all those spots. And it's not going to just go straight up in a line. It's a smallest molecule. It's going to go everywhere. It's going to go into your cells, into your blood, right? Into your glycogen stores, like everywhere along that route it's going.
Mm. Alex, you have been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been an absolute treat for me. The last scientist that I had on was Dr. Timothy Fairchild, who discovered that GLP-1 was naturally secreted in the human body during exercise. And I think that you are perhaps overtaken him in terms of the amount of knowledge that I've learned for today.
Well, I am happy to be here. I'm always happy to talk someone's ear off about things I'm interested in. Going back to that whole like autism thing. So I can talk
Yeah.
forever.
Great, Alex. Where can people find you?
On Instagram, Alex Tarnava, is my handle. My website, alextarnava.com. I have a newsletter that goes out every week with it where my editor, Vadim, and I discuss some topics. YouTube, LinkedIn, my research gate, also Alex Tarnava if you want to see the papers I'm publishing.
Lovely, Alex. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.